Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Oh, we love that Paul Butterfield band music. It's really something else. And we're back with more Live from the Heartland. And this segment of the Live from the Heartland show will be about theater. And I got to say, it's my favorite theater group, which is Free Street Theater. And it's because they're so good, not just because one of them, Coya Paz, is my daughter, but because they really are a special troupe. So good morning to you, Coya Paz and Katrina Dion.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's actually afternoon, but we do that all the time. We don't know. It gets, sometimes this is on at night and CAN TV, sometimes anytime, doesn't matter. People are getting it.
What is time? A human construct.
Well, tell us a little bit about the history of Free Street Theater, how it came to be. I know they used to have a trailer with a stage back in the late 60s. You've been involved with it for a number of years now, probably both of you. And it is a wonderful group. So tell us about it. Give us a little rundown.
Katrina, do you want to talk about it? Katrina directed our 50-year documentary.
Yes, I did. I got to talk to alumni from all now 54 years of Free Street Theater, all about the different projects. Learned a lot. There's a whole 25-minute documentary to even get into that, if anyone wants to ever watch that. But in 1969, Patrick Henry, along with a collaborator, Perry Bear, I believe was his name, were coming together to look, kind of working with the city, right, to kind of think about how could theater be used as a tool to heal a divided city at the time. And what Patrick and Perry really did was look at the statistic of that over 90% of Chicagoans had reported to never have seen theater. And of course, predominantly, most of those folks were from the south and west sides of Chicago, as most of the theater infrastructure here is located in the wealthiest and whitest parts of our city. And so what they did, exactly what you were saying, Michael, was they got together what was to become the first racially integrated theater company of Black and white actors to come together and travel the city and present sort of joyful presentations of people being together on stage.
Well, that's pretty neat. And I got to say, you've created plays that are engender better community relations and people getting along together. It's kind of a little bit political. Let's just be honest. It's political theater, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that we like to describe it, and obviously over 54 years, Free Street has changed a lot. It goes from this sort of soft but important at the time, mission of like, let's model racial unity and togetherness and take theater to communities that don't have access to professional theater. That's still a really important part of our mission. We prioritize work on the south and west side of the city, particularly back of the yards, McKinley Park, Gage Park, Brighton Park, kind of the Spanish-speaking South Side, but not exclusively Spanish-speaking. But what we really try to do now is think about how theater and performance can be partners in a social change effort. So we work closely with organizing partners who have something that they're trying to get done in the city, usually around environmental justice. That's a really key part of our mission these days. To think, how does storytelling, how does humanizing, how does a translational experience, so like sometimes environmental issues are really complicated. How can we make a play that helps audiences connect to them, understand them better, and then connect back to organizers?
Well, you spend a lot of time performing in the parks as well as at your headquarters over on Blackhawk, I believe.
Yeah.
And, you talked about environmental justice, but how do you choose your topics and how do you evolve the actual production? What are the steps you go through? And after we do that, we'll talk more about your out there in the parks and how you do that and how that came to be.
Yeah, I mean, Katrina has a show running right now, so we could talk about how that came to be, right?
Yeah, I think so. The show that I have running right now is called Wasted. And the birth of this show is really how a lot of our shows come to be, which was we were developing a different show that was called 50 and 50, where we performed in all 50 wards of the city in one day. And I was doing a tour of Auburn Gresham with some community leaders there to get a sense of where should we perform in your ward? What are the best places? What spaces do you want to activate? And as I was doing that with Carlos Nelson, he mentioned to me that the reason that there was so much garbage on the street was because the city waste workers were not only when they would come through the neighborhood to take the garbage, they weren't just putting the garbage into the truck, they were taking the entire can and putting it into the truck so that they wouldn't have to stop in the neighborhood again. And there's a backlog for garbage cans in the city, which caused then for neighborhoods to not have access to something as simple as a garbage can to dispose of their waste, right? And then that bleeds into them being called, a dirty neighborhood or something like that. And so this seed birthed into what now has really been like a 3-year process of investigating who and what the city makes disposable. So that's all to say, when we're developing our shows, we do these community storytelling processes where we're gathering stories about the show, but oftentimes other stories, other issues come up in those processes. And we say, there's something there. There's actually a whole other play there that deserves to have its space and time. And so it's kind of this constant process of developing, listening, refining.
I'll give another example that what Katrina is talking about, that process is that in the fall of last year, so October 2022, we were working on a show we thought would be called Buried Seeds, and it was about the hidden stories of Chicago. I'm really personally, as a researcher, interested in the story of Dunning, which was a mental hospital on the northwest side of the city where they just dumped bodies in the backyard, up to 3 feet of bones sometimes. And that's a story a lot of Chicagoans don't know. So we were curious about what else are stories that people don't know. And we started holding community storytelling workshops. We invite people to share stories and thoughts on that theme. And through that conversation, we realized actually what we need to do is stay with this topic of environmental justice, because a lot of people don't know what's buried in back of the yards, don't know what's buried right underneath their houses and parks and how close they are to polluters. And that's just not information they have. So now the show is called There Is a Future, and it's essentially an environmental justice 101 in the parks, outdoors, super funny and joyful. And that's really how we tried to do things. Like Wasted uses house music and disco music to illustrate this issue. We think like we're trying to talk about serious issues, but we're trying to make people feel empowered to be a part of change. And so we can't create things that are discouraging. We need to create things that connect them to change makers. We never believe that the play itself is social justice. It's a tactic in a larger strategy. And we're really clear about that. We don't think like, woo, good for us, we put on an important play, if the work is over. We think like what makes a play useful is that it's really fun, it's really energizing, and it gets people motivated to stay in relationship with these issues.
Let me ask, who participates in the putting the play together, and who are your actors? Where do you find folks? Do they get paid? Is it volunteer, et cetera, et cetera?
We would never not pay somebody. About 40% of our work is working with young people. We think that, youth are a part of our city. Their voices are important. And we Katrina runs the youth program. Katrina's our current artistic director, and I'm our strategic director. And we really treat them like artists, because they are, they're making a show, they're putting on a good show. The other 60% or so of our work is with multi-generational artists. We run a program called the In-House Program, which is a residency for artists who might not otherwise be able to put shows on. And then the rest are drawn from community members, organizers, and artists who live in the neighborhoods where we're performing and that we serve. And, one of the things we say a lot is that formal theater training isn't important to us. The woman who has been hyping the church choir for 20 years is an amazing performer. She knows how to get the audience energized. So we're much more interested in people that will be relatable to our audiences and who have real things to say about the communities we live in. Because economic justice is a key part of our mission, we pay everybody that works with us a minimum of minimum wage. Art is a job, and often much more than that.
Well, that's good to hear. Because
Yeah.
there used to be a lot of volunteer stuff going on. Let me ask a little bit about inspirations, other theater groups that have influenced you. I know Coya knows that I'm already thinking about Uptown and Joint Community Union and the Joint Theater that my sister put together. And I know you two have talked about it, but there are other groups too. I mean, whether it's the San Francisco Mime Troupe, it's, you know, they're just conscious political people involved in theater and trying to move people emotionally, intellectually to a better place. What do you got? What influenced the two of you?
For me, it's so Koya was also, I went to the theater school at DePaul where Koya was also my professor. So a lot of my aesthetics have been, I think, really grounded in Koya's practice and one of our collaborator, Ricardo Gamboa's practices. I've learned a lot from those folks. I would also say because Ricky as well has trained with people like the neo-futurists or, things like viewpoints or tectonic, this way of like the sort of grassroots way of creating theater and really like looking at all of the abundance of tools we have, even if all we have is like tape and a piece of paper. And so I think in that way, like there's theater that's inspiring, but also just the way that protest, right? Like the aesthetics of protest. The sort of the early days, I interviewed you, Michael, as a part of a show back in 2016.
I remember, I've been trying to remember how that all, I
Yeah,
remember seeing the show and I remember, I guess I
yeah.
got interviewed because the show had Rising Up Angry in it.
Yeah, we interviewed you, and there was a little monologue where our student Rivka played you for about 5 minutes. And, we interviewed Lifted Voices at the time, which does a lot of radical militant work of things like die-ins, so really looking at also the aesthetics of that kind of performance that also erupts in activism, right? So I would say that also is really something that we utilized in the work too.
I think that when we think about influences, the reality is that when I was in college, I didn't study or see a lot of the companies that you mentioned, So obviously I'm aware of San Francisco Mime Troupe because your sister, my aunt, was involved in it. So I know that these things happen, but I didn't, I think a lot of the challenge for people who are interested in making work that has an aesthetic that speaks to a divested or underrepresented community is that you just don't often get a chance to see what's possible. And so a lot of times I think we feel like we're making it up from scratch, like what would be cool? What's something that someone's grandma would like? What is happening in this music video? Like Katrina does a lot with pop culture of thinking about what are people going to be able to connect to and how can we riff on that? And I think that's what's great about theater is that it's always in a process of reinvention, as is activism, that we have to always think about like what's resonant right now, not in a way that we're forgetting our history, our roots, because one of the problems that we find, and this is something that we're trying to discourage in our work, is like sometimes people recognize a problem and they're very quick to jump to a solution. Like, I'm going to start an organization that does X, or, oh my gosh, gun violence in the city is so horrible. What can we do? Without recognizing that there are activists and organizers who are deeply committed to working on that may not be celebrated or uplifted. And so that's a really important part of our work is make sure people understand that for every challenge in our city, there is already somebody who has been so impacted by that challenge that they're working to change it. And what they need is support, not replication.
That's good. Both of those, both your comments are good. I'm having a good time with this interview. One of the things that is interesting is that we love our city, we love our government sometimes, and that would include the Park District. They've done some great things and some not so good things. You have a really good relationship, I think, with the Chicago Park District, because the last time I saw you all perform was in Harrison Park a couple summers ago, maybe 3 or 4. I can look it up, but talk a little bit about how that relationship with the Park District either came to be originally, how it's evolved, and just share it, because I think it's important for people to know that there are aspects of our city government, municipal government that are helping to bring about more social, political, economic change.
Yeah, I mean, we're great partners with the Chicago Park District. We say they're our BFFs. We love them. We're so grateful for them. And they work really hard. The Park District is the largest producer of theatrical events in the city. You know, as they create this, they have this Night Out in the Parks program that actually runs through the fall, that is all about like making theater in parks all across the city. We have a very large, it might be the largest park district in the country. And so they're producing a lot of work. We cannot take credit for the relationship with the parks. You know, Free Street's been around for 54 years. Our predecessors were the ones who established, we were the first artist in residence for the Chicago Park District at Pulaski Park. They basically founded that project, like, hey, you got some space, can we have it? They were performing out of an old funeral home in Cabrini Green before that. This was back in the 80s. And of course, when we have always performed in public spaces every summer, the only summer we haven't performed in a public space was 2020. And what we did instead is open a free 24-hour pantry out of our back of the yard space, because we thought our community needed food and diapers and formula more than they needed a socially distanced show.
Are you now in the back of the yards and not over on Blackhawk?
We got two locations.
Two of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're growing, you're expanding.
Yeah, and we want to buy a building. So if you have any rich people listening to the show who are motivated and excited, we currently rent in back of the yards, but we would really like to put down more roots. We've been there for about 6 years.
Well, you just can call me Moneybags and I'll see what I can pull off. But
all right, Moneybags.
I will spread the word.
You want a building. So.
Do you ever think about taking these productions, maybe involving them even more and presenting them in theaters, or traveling a little bit on the road, that kind of thing? You know, I'm always pushing for, what else can we do?
We think about touring all the time, especially, you know, whenever we have the opportunity. Me and Coya have been around the state of Illinois to facilitate different conversations in towns as small as Toulon, which is, I think, less than 1,000 people in the county. And everywhere we go and we talk about our work, people always come and tell us more stories about their community, you know? And so what we would love to do is be able to tour, you know, not only more of Illinois, but more of the country, and use it as a model to be able to present stories about Chicago, yes, but also use it to start infusing our work with the stories of how these issues are affecting the country at large and many different people. So that's definitely, we were literally going to tour a show to Canada, to a water protector conference. We were going to tour a show Parched about water justice in October of 2020. So of course that didn't happen. So it's something that we definitely were revving up for and then weren't able to do. So now we think we're in the space, I think, again, where we're starting to think a lot more about touring again.
Sorry, I think like every theater company, we were heavily impacted by COVID. Theater is a live art. And so we're still in that mode of, you know, Wasted is our first like full big audience run. We did a show last year called 57 Blocks that Katrina directed, that was on a bus that traveled up and down Ashland, but that could only have like 10, 12 people in the bus. So this is the first time we're back to doing shows for large amounts of people. And we do have a for hire arm where we do facilitated custom design dialogues for people all over the country who are looking for more effective and joyful ways to have a difficult conversation. And we're really good at that. You know, if we can talk to people about like, hey, have you heard about chromium-6? It's in your water and the EPA doesn't care. We can also talk about, yeah, there you go. What's going on? Why is your staff having such a hard time communicating around a check-in or things like that? We do strategic planning. So, you know, we believe that theater is useful. It's useful in a social justice movement. It's useful to change individual lives. It's useful as a practice to help other people think about how they want to be together in the world.
How about giving us what's coming up? What do you have planned for the summer? Some dates or places that people should be aware of? You're both smiling. What's going on?
So Wasted just closed. And our next show is There Is a Future, Tenemos un Futuro, which is a bilingual free show touring.
Say that again real slowly.
There is a future, or en español, Tenemos un Futuro, which is a bilingual show about environmental justice, and it will tour the parks. It's super fun and funny, and promise. And we also have a 3-week youth intensive. So if there are young people interested in getting involved in theater, it's free. And we will be doing drag loteria events throughout the summer. We have a partnership with Star Farm, which is an urban garden, and with Plant Chicago, which does sustainability and a circular economy work. So we do outdoor summer events all summer. Check our website.
What is the website?
freestreet.org.
freestreet.org.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to ask both of you what I'm starting to do this as an old guy. Whether in my class I teach it to Paul or on the radio show, I like people to talk a little bit about how they got involved, not only in this case in theater, but in being conscious political people, because I think we need examples of others who have chosen these paths and traveled these roads and pathways for younger people coming up. I don't know if we have a lot of young people listening to the show, but over the years they'll watch it because, just keep getting clicks on YouTube. So give me a little bit about each of you, where you came from, how you got into it, and what moved you along the way.
Do you want me to go first? Do you want to go first?
Why don't you go first? Yeah.
Okay. So I think, obviously I'm one of your children. You're one of my parents. So something you said a lot when we were growing up, or always, you still say this, do good in the world because the world needs all that you do. My biological parents were never married, and I don't want any stories about how you met, but it did produce a love child, which was me. And I was raised by a lot of different parents in different configurations, all of whom had a deep commitment to social justice. I think that's a connecting thread. So there's never been a time in my life when I wasn't sort of thinking about how to have a relationship between arts and social justice. I'm also a Quaker, and I know it's unfashionable to talk about religion sometimes, but Quakers believe that all people are equal. And so I've always had this deep, heartfelt commitment to how can my work better serve the people in my community? And so I think that, and I joke a lot, I wish I was an environmental scientist and not a theater maker, but I'm a theater maker. And so I'm doing the best I can to make change in that modality.
Well, you're doing good, Coya. Keep it up.
Thank you.
How about you, Katrina?
Yeah. So, I think similarly, my parents had a big influence. My dad is a political science professor, and my mom has done a lot of environmental economics work as well. So I was a child at the dinner table where we talked about all that stuff. My dad would talk to me a lot about his research at the time growing up, which had a lot to do with the KKK in Indiana in particular. So I was involved in a lot of conversations about the way that racism was in our country and was still thriving in our country, right? And so that wasn't a conversation I was left out of. And then I was also really fortunate to be really empowered as a young person through a program I did. Grew up in Iowa City, Iowa. I did a program called Youth Advisory Panel, which was all about peer-to-peer sexual health education, and even talking to anywhere from 12 to 18-year-olds about sexual health. And so that was, I think, really powerful for me to be trusted with this information and to be able to be a leader with this information. I think that's the reason why I was called to work with the youth ensemble, because that was a program that really showed me that I could be a teacher and an owner of knowledge, and I could present it in ways that were helpful to my community. And so I love to bring that into the youth ensemble itself. So I feel like those were all things that sort of helped pave the way for me to become more radicalized in this way, and excited to think about how I could bring those conversations at the dinner table to a place like the theater. That, and then just making up dances in my living room constantly as a young person, and living room dance culture. Basically now I just get to make dances all the time and make theater all the time, except the living rooms look a little different.
Well, the two of you are great examples for other people to follow. And I really do appreciate that you both came on. I know you're very busy. I'm sorry people are not going to get to see Wasted, which raises a question. Do you videotape these, and do you ever think about putting them up on YouTube?
Yeah, so actually we do have some of our work on our Vimeo channel, where you can check out that documentary I mentioned, as well as one of our productions, Still Here, which Coya directed, and Parched, which I worked on. Wasted, we're actually filming it this week. So we should, within the next few months, have a version of that available to watch, as well as we recorded 57 blocks last year, which is still in post-production. That was a little bit more complicated.
Well, I'm going to look forward to watching your next production, and I'll come, I promise. And I really appreciate you both coming on today. This was a good segment.